Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special edition of the Ultimate Fashion History. The 2017 Oscar nominations have just been announced, and while everybody else is all at Twitter about who's going to win Best Movie and who's going to win Best Actress or Best Actor, here on the Ultimate Fashion History, the category that we always get the most excited about is, of course, the category for Best Costume. So in this special edition, we're going to take each movie one by one, analyze the costumes, see why they might win, discuss why they might not, and then I'll give my own Oscar predictions. The movies that have been nominated in the Best Costume category this year are Florence Foster Jenkins, costumes by Consolata Boyle; Jackie, costumes by Madeleine Fontaine; Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, with costumes by the legendary Colleen Atwood; La La Land, costumes by Mary Zophres; and Allied, costumes by Joanna Johnston. And what I think is so interesting about these nominations is that 4 of the movies are set in historic periods, and the only one that isn't really gives the feel that it is set in a different time. So let's look at them one by one. First up, the delightful Florence Foster Jenkins with costumes by Consolata Boyle. What fun she must have had costuming Meryl Streep in the role as the world's worst singer. The movie is set in the 40s, but as you see here, Meryl Streep's wardrobe actually harks back to the 1930s, which really is a stroke of genius because Florence Foster Jenkins was exactly the sort of woman who would cling to the fashion aesthetics of her younger glory days with all of these frills and ruffles and fur. What I loved was the attention to detail. Just take a look at that hat with the net and the flowers and the beads and the birds. And look at Hugh Grant's tie pin. So many tiny little touches that absolutely gave this delightfully ridiculous story a true sense of period. But of course, what everybody is talking about in terms of costume are the hilarious stage costumes that Florence Foster Jenkins wears. My worry, though, here is that the Academy, when voting, might think, well, hang on, these were just copies of what the real Florence Foster Jenkins wore on stage. But of course, they're not just copies. As you can see here, you can't just copy something from the past and make it work on a wide screen in 2016. But of course, there was a very large cast in this movie, all of which had to be costumed in period, and there was not a wrong note. That attention to detail was followed through in every single costume, be it a uniform, be it an evening gown. Take a look at that dress the red-headed lady on the left is wearing, with all of that sequined applique, absolutely gorgeous. Costumes in Florence Foster Jenkins by Consolata Boyle, deserving of an Oscar win. Next up, let's look at the costumes in Jackie by Madeleine Fontaine, who did an amazing job of bringing Jackie Bouvier Kennedy to life, just as Natalie Portman did in her remarkable performance. My concern here, though, is that the Academy might think, well, hang on, these are just copies of Oleg Cassini or copies of Chanel. But as I said earlier, you don't just copy a costume to make it read on the screen. There was not a wrong note here. Of course, a lot of tweaks had to be done, even when looking at Jackie Kennedy's original costumes to make them work on the wide screen. But everything was perfect, down to the covering on a button. Nobody on the planet can spot a costume anachronism like I can. I'm like a hawk, I'm like an eagle, pouncing on anything that's historically incorrect. And when it came to the costumes in Jackie, everything was spot on. Perfect recreations of Jacqueline Kennedy's actual wardrobe, but also there were plenty of costumes that I never saw Jackie Kennedy wear, and yet I believed absolutely that every piece of wardrobe belonged in the former First Lady's wardrobe. And again, there was a huge cast to costume in period, and every single cast member looked perfect. Next up, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, with costumes by Colleen Atwood. The movie is set in the 20s, and these costumes are brought beautifully to life. They're sort of a heightened fantasy 1920s costume. And what I love about them is that even though these costumes and these characters are not set in the same time period as the Harry Potter franchise, the costumes are still part of the Harry Potter universe. This looked like a Harry Potter movie, and the costumes looked like they belonged in a Harry Potter movie too. My worry here is that there wasn't an awful lot of wardrobe for the principals. They don't change costumes very often. But again, there were huge ensemble pieces, everybody wearing this sort of fantasy Harry Potter version of 1920s costume. Well, it's no surprise that La La Land was nominated in the Best Costume category, because it was nominated in every other category too, wasn't it? Everybody loves this movie, and quite rightly. What I love about Mary Zophra's costumes here is that everybody looks like they shopped at H&M, and yet, at the same time, these costumes evoke the classic Hollywood musicals of the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. Take a look at this. All of this costume is completely contemporary, and yet the use of palette, these bright colors, and all of this movement in the textiles really does recall movies like West Side Story, doesn't it? A very romantic movie, and I particularly like Mary Zophra's wardrobe for Ryan Gosling, because while of course it looks like he shopped at Zara, it nevertheless recalls, I don't know, Gene Kelly, for example. Color was so important in La La Land, especially in these big musical scenes where if you look at everybody's costume individually, it really does look like off the peg real life retail, and yet these colors combined totally recall West Side Story or An American in Paris or even On the Town. And finally, Allied, the exciting wartime and post-war thriller with costumes by Joanna Johnston. Oh my God, I love these costumes. Beautiful on paper and then brought beautifully to life. Look at that gown in that light teal with that beautiful bias peplum and those bishop sleeves. There was an awful lot of wardrobe in Allied, both menswear, women's wear, and there was not a wrong note. Everything was perfect, down to the attention to detail. Look at this applique on Marianne Cotillard's shoulders here. Absolutely exquisite. Everything was perfect. It recalled Casablanca to me. It recalled those wonderful costumes from the 40s by Ori Kelly, or Adrian even. Even the less glamorous costumes were completely on point. And also there were an awful lot of large ensemble scenes, nightclub scenes. Take a look at the figures on either side of Marianne Cotillard here. The attention to detail, the applique, the embroidery. You know how much I love 1940s fashion to begin with. And I think that Joanna Johnston did a fantastic job bringing the era to life. So who is going to grab the Oscar? Well, my personal favorite costumes were those of Joanna Johnston for Allied, but only because I can see myself wearing any one of these beautiful gowns, even though in real life, I'm probably more Florence Foster Jenkins. If you'd like to learn more about some of the fashion eras replicated in this year's Oscars, here on The Ultimate Fashion History, we have full-length lectures on fashion in the 20s, fashion in the 40s, and of course, our Fave Film Fashion series also looks at some of those wonderful Golden Age Hollywood musicals. You can contact me through my website, amandahalley.com. Join our Facebook group. We already have Oscar Fever. I'll be back with more on The Ultimate Fashion History, so just click the little circle to subscribe. Have a wonderful Oscar night, and I hope your favorite wins. And as always, thanks for watching.